Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and today we're going to be talking about Lancer, the RPG game that I've been covering a lot of here on the channel. And I'm going to be doing now. I did like a first impressions and like a final thoughts on it, but now I'm going to be doing like an actual full review of the game because one, I think it deserves it, and two, I think I can do a much better breakdown of the game now that I've been looking into it for so long. So with this amazing art here behind me, let's go ahead and talk about what Lancer is. Now, to put it very roughly, but to give you the most, I guess, like realistic understanding of the game, Lancer is a tactical mech game that allows you and your friends to play very high powered mechs. I want to say high fantasy almost, because the thing is, it's very sci-fi, right? Many of the mechs can do some pretty crazy things, warping dimensions, turning back time sometimes, and all kinds of really cool stuff. And the tactical element of the game is very big. When you look at Lancer, when you're planning on playing the game, you're looking at what mechs you're going to get into, you're looking at what builds you're going to get into, and after that comes kind of like the pilot stuff. So you play a pilot in this game, sure, and your pilot is a big part of the narrative. Obviously, you're the one piloting the mech and doing all kinds of stuff, but the real stars of the show are the mechs and how the mech licenses work. But maybe I'm getting a little bit too ahead of myself. So let's kind of break it down into the basics. Lancer, you play a Lancer pilot. You are a cream of the crop, top of the top pilot who can maneuver and use not the warframes, the frames of the mechs in the game. And this requires a lot of personal skill, mental ability, and oftentimes a lot of like implants. You need physical augmentation, enhancements, mental augmentations, and enhancements to even pilot one of these things. So from the get-go, your characters are special. They're special because the they are people that these massive corporations are willing to invest tons and tons of resources into to do whatever. It doesn't act, there's no specific purpose for the Lancers other than you do the jobs that no one else can do. There's a big pirate alliance going on. Well, your average pilots, your average like AI frames or AI like cybernetic guards can't really deal with such a massive onslaught, but like two Lancers can. That's how impactful you are in the setting, which is awesome. It's really great, and it's something that and let's talk about the setting, because the setting is like thousands of years in the potential future when humanity has spread out all over our arm of the Milky Way galaxy, and now there's thousands and thousands of worlds inhabited, and it's very interesting. And what makes it more interesting is science has gone so far that we are starting to come to things that become less like recognizable to you and me. For instance, you start coming across like the possibility of what is an AI, what is a NHP, which are non-human persons, which are like more advanced AI. There's all kinds of really weird stuff. There's all kinds of warping of space-time continuum based stuff. Like I said earlier, some of the mechs have the ability to even wind back time only for themselves. Also, space travel is it's one part like near speed of light travel, and it's one part blink space. And blink space is like an alternate dimension that is who knows, so vast that we don't even know it's under have a exact understanding. And when you enter into blink space, it's a space that like doesn't exist. It's a dimension that simultaneously exists and doesn't exist, because you go through one blink gate and you just exit out the other blink gate. There's nothing inside. You don't see anything, you don't recognize anything, you don't even acknowledge time passing, and for all intents and purposes time doesn't pass. it's like teleportation, but you are actively going into another dimension. With this, the use of blink space, there's also the OmniNet, which is this big internet. It's essentially space internet. That's all you really need to know. Blink, the OmniNet is just the internet, but expands across, one whole arm of the Milky Way galaxy, which is pretty intense. Meaning that you could have a video chat with your parents from millions of light years away, even. It's pretty nuts. And the setting is all about this idea of what happens when humanity is spread this far out. How does anything work? How does anything function? There is a major political force is not really the best way to put it, but they essentially run everything. They're called Union, and what Union does is they kind of manage everything. But the thing with Union is space is so massive that there's a big likelihood that in your entire life you would never see a Union agent. In fact, it might be 1,000 years before your planet sees Union. But when Union comes, it's usually for something, and they usually bring battleships. That's the problem with Union. They help kind of keep the peace. They maintain the blink gates. They maintain the OmniNet. They're the reason why humanity hasn't just kind of been completely disconnected. But when Union wants something from your world, they take it and they hold nothing back. Union is completely unopposable, and this causes problems, obviously. Now, Union isn't necessarily a bad organization. It's just that it's an organization so immensely powerful that when they choose something that you don't like, it becomes a massive problem. And in addition to Union, there's also a variety. There's the major corporations, which are essentially corporations that make all kinds of things, looking into like genetics, gene seeding planets, doing all kinds of crazy stuff, making the corporations are more important kind of for Lancers in the aspect of they provide you your mechs, whether it's Harrison Armory with their militaristic, very their war crime kind of centered organization, or if it's Smith Shimano, who's very much into like gene splicing, cloning, and also the production of all kinds of things. Like, one video cannot properly encapsulate everything that this setting has. All you need to know, if you're interested in the game, is that space is massive with infinite numbers of things to do, whether it's as a Lancer pilot or whether it's in your pilot's personal life. And there's these massive corporations and there's Union that manages everything. So a lot of the setting is very interesting. It explores a lot of interesting things, like time dilation, for instance. How many who are like traders amongst the stars, they travel at near light speed so much that some of them have lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years because of the time dilation. For real time space, time has been going what we feel is normally, but for them, time has been flying by. When you get out of near uh, speed of light travel, like decades go by. It's pretty nutty. So that being the case, there's all kinds of very interesting stories. And like I said, there's also like biologicals. We haven't found aliens that are sapients, but there are aliens in the setting. Granted, you could always do whatever with your own games. And sometimes you have to fight giant kaiju battles with your mechs, which is pretty cool. There's all kinds of stuff. But let's talk about now the game. Now that you have a general sense of the setting, let's go ahead and talk about the game itself. How does it work? How do you do anything, right? So predominantly, this is a D20 system. It's a singular D20. You need to roll that D20, and more often than not, you need to get a 10 or higher to succeed on the check. Now, there are many ways you can alter the die in order to gain a benefit or in order for things to become more difficult. So the three major ways that you adjust dice is with either accuracy and difficulty. Accuracy, you roll whatever accuracy number you have in D6s. taking the higher result and adding that to your d20 roll. So if you roll 3 dice, you get a 2, a 4, and a 6. You add the 6 to your roll, throw the other dice out, and then it's whatever 6 plus you roll on the dice roll. Now your grit, and same for difficulty. Difficulty does the same. Now your grit is used for some very small things. It's not used in a lot of checks, more just adjusting your character's major stats, but it is used for how you attack with your mech. So you get grit pretty much every 2 license level, every odd license level, because your grit is always equal to half your license level rounded up. And you get your first grit at level 1, which you actually start at license level 0 when you're a fresh face off the Lancer training program. So that being the case, you don't even get your grit bonus at the beginning, and this grit adds to like your mech HP, adds to your pilot's HP, and it adds to your attacks and your saves. Now, the other bonuses are like statistics, like triggers for pilots are whenever your pilot is doing something outside of the mech. So for instance, you can make up whatever triggers you want to. The pilot side of the game is very free narrative. It's not very tactical, it's not very D&D. The game is split pretty much down the middle when it comes to tactical and narrative. The narrative stuff plays so differently because when you're in narrative play, you roll to like one of the skills they have in the game is called apply fist to faces, right? And that's your combat skill. And so when you see someone that you're like, I want to knock that guy out, the GM's like, okay, go ahead and make your roll. You can apply a trigger to that, and the triggers are 2, 4, and 6. Every time you increase your license level, you can either upgrade one of your triggers up to a maximum of +6 by +2s every time, or you can get a new trigger at +2. So in any regard, you go up, you roll your apply to fist faces. If you succeed, bam, the guy is knocked out. You don't calculate HP, you don't do any of that. You either succeed the check or you don't. Now, there are different kinds of checks that can relate to this. So a GM could say, okay, but this is a risky check. You can knock the guy out, but there's a chance that someone might see you. So even if you succeed, you might still have a negative consequence unless you get a 20 or higher on the roll, and then you succeed with no consequences. And the GM can say that this is a difficult check, and so will roll a d6 against your roll. Accuracy and difficulty counters itself out. So if you have 1 difficulty and 1 accuracy, you just make a flat roll. You don't roll anything else. And when you're piloting your mech, you are gonna have pilot skills, and your pilot skills are more important for 1 saves. So for instance, if an enemy tries to stun you, you might need to make a whole save using your mech's kind of sturdiness to avoid the effect. So you would apply your bonus of your whole, whatever you put into that, into the effect. These pilot skills also increase your mech's effects, which let me go ahead and show you loosely how that works. All right, so as you can see over on this side here, every time you invest in your pilot's hull, for instance, your mech gains 2 hull, which is your mech's HP, essentially hull points. And every 2 points you put into hull, you get a repair cap increase. Now, repair cap is used to mend your mech, like either for a short interval after combat or over a longer period of time. There are full restore stuff. And all of this is kind of based on the mission structure, which I'll get to here in a little bit. Most of the pilot skills that you get have 1 stat that increases with every point and another stat that increases with every 2 points. So another example we have right here is the agility. Agility increases your evasion, which is how hard your mech is to hit with most kinetic type weapons or even energy weapons, and speed for every 2 points. So your mech's speed will increase every 2. Now, your mech skills and your pilot skills are almost completely unrelated to each other. You never use triggers in combat, nor do you use your pilot skills outside of combat. Now, there are a few situations where there might be some crossover, but they're incredibly rare. So now you understand the basic principles. You roll a d20, You may add or subtract a d6 die, or depending on if you have difficulty or accuracy. And you have some flat statistics that affect certain things, like triggers or mech skills. So that's all well and good, right? This is all what you build up on the character. But what about the mechs, right? What about the cool part of the game? What do the mechs do? Boy, let me tell you, the mechs are great. So let's go ahead and check a couple of them out. All right, so let's go ahead and check out one of my favorite mechs, the Drake. Now, let me just have my camera real quick so you can get a better look at the image. This boy here, big, tanky dude. It's got a chain gun, all kinds of stuff like that. Really cool. I really love these kind of paramilitary style mechs. Now, if we look at the stats here, which I'm going to have to move my camera over real quick. So as you can see here, there's a variety of stats that your mech has specifically, and each frame has their own kind of stat layouts. Now, you without even buying the core book, you can actually look this up on CompCon to take a look. I actually have a series going over each of the mechs and their licenses. Check that one out. But for this review, let's go ahead and talk about a few of these things. Size indicates how many hexes that your mech takes up, and it's not a 1-for-1. A size 1 mech takes up 1 hex, but a size 2 mech takes up actually 3 hexes. So they get bigger, and the bigger the mech is, either the harder it is for them to get behind cover, or the better cover they provide for their allies, which is something we'll talk about here in a little bit. How much armor your mech has here is how much damage is subtracted from whatever damage is dealt to them. Their HP or hull points is how much before you take stress. So, or structure. Structure is kind of like a tiered system where you have 4 structure. All mechs always have 4 structure. And every time your hull points goes to 0, you lose a structure. You might break something on your mech, and then your hull points goes back up to max. Any over damage subtracts from that new amount, meaning that you can take multiple structure if you take enough damage. Though that's very unlikely most of the time, as even the squishiest of mechs have around like 6 HP. And damage in this game mostly revolves around the use of like a singular d6 with at most a +3, sometimes multiple d6s. And most mechs have some form of armor or defense. Repair cap, I've already mentioned that one before, where it's how you can fix your mech. Some uses of repair can be used in combat based on the use of mech abilities and the like. It also can help you restore ammunition for limited systems. Your evasion, as I mentioned before, is how easy it is for you to avoid being hit in combat. Now, most mechs have like a 8 evasion, but we can see the Drake here has a 6, so it's a lot easier to hit. And speed is how many hex you can move with a singular like move action. In this case, 3, making the Drake very, very slow. The save target is whenever you roll or whenever you make an enemy make a save. For instance, you have a gun that can knock an enemy back. They might have to make a whole save. They need to make this target plus your grit score. So if you have a grit of 1, this save target actually becomes 11. Sensors is for the use of tech stuff. You can do things like hacking, detecting enemies, marking enemies, targeting them, all kinds of stuff like that. That's how many hexes you can go out. So 10 sensor range is 10 hexes, which is actually not that bad. E-defense is essentially your tech defense. Anytime someone is attempting to hack you or are using weapons that have a smart homing system, they're going to be going up against your system target number. In this case, the Drake has a 6, which is also pretty low. Your tech attack bonus is how much you get when you are trying to hack someone else. So some mechs are better at hacking than others. And SP is system points, and this is how many extra systems you can add onto the mechs, as mechs in this game are very modular. There's also heat cap. Now, heat is something that comes up in a variety of ways. Heat cap is predominantly used when you have a system, like for instance, you're using a big chain gun. Using that gun might heat your mech up as the cylinder spins, meaning that you're going to take more and more stress when your heat cap goes down to 0 because it's traded the same as your HP. Then you stress your mech out, which is similar, though you have a chance of your reactor going nuclear and you might need to jump out of your mech or it explodes. So, similar to your structure, you have 4 stress. When you go down to 0 stress, your mech is done. Your reactor is going to blow. So, that being the case, those are like the core stats, but all the mechs are incredibly modular. This frame might be what we have to work with, and each frame does offer unique things, not just their core stats. Many mechs have very similar core stats, but what makes them truly different is the traits and the core system. So the traits that the Drake has here, for instance, is the Drake is incredibly heavy, so it can't be pushed, pulled, knocked prone, or knocked back by any smaller characters, whether that's biologicals, other mechs, or whatever. So if your size is smaller than 2, you can't push this frame around. Now, there are some exceptions, but, as a general rule, that's the case. Now, blast plating is actually pretty unique to the Drake because the Drake has resistance, which means it reduces the amount of damage it receives in half to heat and burn from any attacks that have these areas. So there are attacks in this game that do like area effects, like lines, cones, emanation bursts, or just blast zones. And the Drake itself is resistance to damage, heat, and burn from those kind of effects. So using any kind of area effects against the Drake is less effective. The Drake is slow, so anytime it uses any agility-based checks, it has to roll with a minus D6 to whatever the roll is. And it's a Guardian, so it acts as hard cover. Hard cover is really cool because whenever you're being attacked, but hard cover is between you and the person attacking you, that enemy will roll at 2 difficulty, meaning they have to roll 2d6, taking the higher one and subtracting that from their attack roll. Each mech also comes with a variety of different mounts. The Drake has a pretty standard line of mounts. It has a main mount, or 2 main mounts, and a heavy mount. Now, there are multiple types of mounts. The main ones you have to be concerned with are auxiliary, main, heavy, and super heavy. Now, the main mount itself can use either a main weapon or an auxiliary weapon. The heavy mounts, actually, you know what? Here are the many different types of mounts. So you can see here that main is 1 main or 1 aux. Heavy mount can take a 1 heavy weapon, 1 main weapon, or 1 auxiliary weapon. A aux mount can take up to 2 auxiliary weapons. And a main aux mount can have 1 main and 1 auxiliary or 2 auxiliary. Flexible, which is one of the more common mounts that you'll see on a lot of mech frames, can take either 1 main or 2 aux mounts. There are integrated weapon mounts, and then super heavy weapons don't have a unique mount, and instead, in order to use a super heavy weapon, you have to equip it onto a heavy mount and another mount of any other size. And I figured now that I'm going through a lot of the stats here, let's take a look at some of the mech like sizes on a grid. So here we have 1 size 1 mech and 2 size 2 mechs. So you can see here that the size 1 mech takes up a singular hex, but size 2 takes up 3 hexes, and a size 3 will actually take up a whole comb on the map. So mechs can vary very much in size. And then there's the goblin here. That's actually technically a size 1/2, which is more human sized, a little bit bigger than humans typically. This also shows different kind of area of effects. And so when you're looking at a lot of the mechs in the game, they have their unique traits. They have base core stats that you can alter with mech skills, and they also have their core systems. So moving back here to the Drake, this particular frame has the Fortress Protocol. You essentially become a living bunker. Now, it does a whole bunch of really cool things, and if you want more of an explanation of that, then you can go ahead and check out my video on the Drake. It's a really good one. But more or less, you become a living fortress. This makes it you become immobilized, you gain immunity to all kinds of movement based effects, you're constantly covered by a hard cover, and anyone who's adjacent or near you gains the effects of your blast plating, meaning your allies even get the benefit of being resistant to area damage. It makes you a living bunker on the battlefield, and each frame in the game has incredibly cool core systems that you can use. Now, in a mission though, unless you get some way of getting it back, you can only use your core point once. You get one core point that you can use, meaning that you can use your ultimate ability pretty much one combat or once in a combat, depending on how the mission structure is set up. So let's go ahead and talk about the mission setup. What are you expecting when you're getting into the game? What kind of missions are you going on? Well, it depends on your story, because your story, the missions can be as long as a single session or multiple sessions. Now, the game is designed for you to not have super long missions. You know, a mission probably shouldn't be any more than 5 sessions at most. And 5 is a very intense amount of time for a mission. And the main reason for this is you don't level up in this game. After you get through a mission, whether you succeed the mission or fail your objective, your license level increases. When your license level increase, you get a bunch of stuff, you get some level ups, you get that new trigger I mentioned before, you get a new a +1 to one of your mech skills. You get a new license level, which I'll go into licenses here, or a new license rank in one of the frames, which we'll go over here in a moment. And in addition, you potentially can even get something as a core bonus, which is a special bonus that applies to all mechs that you have. Yes, all mechs, because as you increase in license ranks, you gain access to more frames, meaning you can have multiple frames. The max license level in the game is actually 12. If you take, you know, 1 to 3 ranks in as many as you can, if you get 3 ranks in as many different licenses as you can, that means that you'll have 4 different mech frames that you can modulate the different parts between. Not the frames, but the different license systems that you can add, which we'll look at here in a little bit. But the story is really up to you. What you do, whether you're being hired by one of the corporations to quell an uprising on a planet, or whether you're defending a mining base from a group of, pirates. There is no limits to the types of things that missions can really include. And battlefields are also incredibly varied. I did mention that this is a tactical game. When you are on the battlefield, there might be a variety of different circumstances, whether you're in super hot temperatures, so your mechs might gain heat every round, or super cold temperatures where your mechs become slowed, or maybe you're in space and it's a space battle. There are unique rules for fighting in space. Not only that, but terrain plays a big part, because cover is a big part in the game. Sometimes you fight in cities. Like, there's a lot of really cool things that you can do on the tactical level. And on a narrative point, I mean, there's all the interesting aspects of the world, dealing with individuals. You can actually gain access to unique weapons, parts, or whatever through a mission. You might be given a reward saying access to a unique test weapon for that instance. So there's a lot that you can do, and these missions are kind of designed for more kind of short form styles of games. Now, they don't have to be, and you can just get to a point where you're like, okay, we're license level like 6. We're pretty far along. The game might be taking on deeper and deeper, more narrative intensive missions with multiple battles in that mission. That might be a thing that happens. In any regard, the game's pace goes at the speed that you and your table wants, which is something that I think is a very big aspect to Lancer. It's something that I think plays really well into its strengths, that because the combat is so intense, sometimes you just need a breather for a little bit so you can do some narrative play for like a session before you get back into another combat. Or if you just love combat, You can just have multiple combats in a session or a combat every session. If you don't have a lot of time to play the game, you can level up after every session you play, pretty much meaning that after 12 sessions, you're at max level. Typically, it goes longer than that, but it can be as varied as you want. And because of the division of play, well, there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of variety in how your campaign goes, which again is another strength of the game. So I did mention modularity. So you can't change out like individual parts of a frame, but you can change out parts from the license. So for instance, we're looking at the Blackbeard, which if you want to see the Blackbeard itself, it is a heavy melee based frame that uses cables to pull enemies in to massacre them. It's a very fun frame, and it has a bunch of abilities kind of centered around that. A lot of the license itself is based on supporting the frame that it contains within. So the rank 1, we get access to like the chainsword that you can see here. It is a melee weapon that does a really good amount of damage, a d6. It's reliable too, which reliable too means that even if you miss, you still deal 2 damage to the enemy. And it has a threat range of 1. Now, all weapons, it doesn't matter if they're range or otherwise, technically have a threat of 1. Threat on melee weapons indicates their range, so this can attack 1 hex away. But in combat, you get reactions that you can do, and if an enemy starts a move action within your threat range, so for this axe, it would be 1 space away, you can attack them as a reaction. I'll get a little bit more into the action economy in just a little bit, but let's finish up here with the actual like license. So this is a weapon, but you can also, at rank 1, you also get access to the synthetic muscle netting, which is a very useful thing if you like to ram, grapple, or do whatever to your enemy. So one of the things with like ramming or grappling is you can't do it to enemies that are larger than you. But with the synthetic muscle netting, you actually count as being the same size as a target that's larger than you. This allowing you to essentially ram or grapple targets, 1 to 2 sizes bigger than you, which is pretty intense. And whenever you grapple or ram an opponent of the same size or smaller, you are always counted at least being 1 size larger. Additionally, your lifting and dragging capacity is doubled. So this is a really cool system that you could put on any mech if you have 2 system points that you can see here. So no matter what frame you're using, you can put the synthetic muscle netting that you got from the first rank of the license. Now, you unlock the actual frame on the second rank of any license. Each license has 3 parts, and on the second one, so when you get 2 ranks in, you unlock any frames that are in the license plus whatever is available. This one has the flechette launcher, which is essentially a shrapnel shotgun, more or less, and the nanocarbon sword, which is a bigger, heavier weapon than the chain axe, does more damage, has a higher reliable, and has a longer reach. So besides the frame, you can put any of these extra parts here on any. You can have a melee Drake that I showed you earlier. That's not even where the modularity ends. Each of the individual corporations that you get into, every time you get 3 ranks into a particular corporation, you gain access to a core bonus. Now it's 3 that have to be all within licenses for that corporation. So you can't have one NSP North Star and one Smith Shimano and one, I don't know, Harrison Armory and get a core bonus from each of them. No, you need 3 all from IPSN. I said it wrong. North Star to get one of these. Now these apply to all the mechs that you have access to. So for instance, reinforced frame here, you just get 5 additional hull points, which can substitute the need to invest in a hull into your mech. Now, these actually don't apply only to IPS North Star mech frames, though. If I was to go 3 points into IPS North Star to gain, for instance, reinforced frame, and then I was to go into Smith Shimano to pilot something like the Monarch, then I can apply the reinforced frame to the Monarch. And you get this every 3 levels that you get, meaning that by the end of the game, you're going to have access to up to 4 of these unique powers. Now, they don't stack, you can't get multiples of them, but many of them can be incredibly helpful. And many of the licenses have a good number of them and are getting more as they're releasing more books. In addition to licenses and ranks, your pilot also picks up talents, special abilities that they can use while piloting a mech frame, or sometimes even for stuff outside of mech frames that they can apply to any mech that they're piloting. Now, you start with a number of different talents, and every time you gain a new license level, you gain another rank in a talent that you already have up to its maximum of 3, or in a new talent. So Ace here, for instance, is all about flying. So you get bonuses like acrobatics here. While you're flying, you gain a bonus to your agility checks, and any time an attack misses you, you may fly up to 2 spaces in any direction as a reaction, which is pretty cool. So the game is so modular because not only does your pilot skills affect your mech frame, as we looked at earlier, giving it more hull points, making it faster, doing whatever, but investing in different licenses give you access to different weapons, new systems that do different things. On top of that, you have new talents that you can apply to all the mechs you're piloting, and you get core bonuses every so many ranks from one of the corporations that physically change each of your mech frames. This makes it so that in Lancer, by the time you're getting to about rank, like license level 5, you're going to be so different than any other Lancer pilot out there because you just might be selecting different things. It's so unlikely to have another player select the same exact things you do unless they're doing it intentionally, because there's just so many varieties of things, and your pilots can be so different and unique as well. There's no limitations on like where your character is from, whether you're from some backwater world or whether you're from Cradle, which is Earth essentially. The universe is vast, and the reasons for you becoming a Lancer pilot is many. They even have unique backgrounds that if a situation comes up, you can apply your background to give yourself an advantage, or the GM might apply your background to give yourself a disadvantage. To avoid being recognized, it might be beneficial to be some backwater country person, but if you're a celebrity, you'll have a disadvantage on going unnoticed. So, that being the case, the game is so varied, and I already kind of talked about the narrative structure. It's very loose. Whatever you're doing, everything you're doing is very just as the story needs. You only roll when something is actually like a difficult action for your characters, but the combat is where this game really shines. And we're going to look real quick at the action economy. Now, Lancer operates on a turn-based tactical grid. It uses hex grids, but there are ways to adjust it for squares if you really want to. And every time you take a turn, you get to move. You can then do either a full action or 2 quick actions. And once per turn, you can overcharge your mech, which has an increasing amount of heat that it deals to your mech to gain an additional quick action. Now, anytime you're doing a turn, for rare exceptions, you can only do a unique action once. So, for instance, skirmish is what you do when you fire a singular mount on your frame. So, an example of a turn might be you move and boost as a quick action. Boosting just moves you your speed again, and then shoot an enemy. And this game does have broken up movement. So you can move so many hexes and then shoot an enemy and then finish out your movement if that's what you're intending to do, unless you become engaged with an enemy, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And you can either quick action to do another action. Now, overcharging allows you to do an action you've already done that turn. So you can boost twice if you overcharge at the cost of heating your mech up. Now, this doesn't always work, and some actions can truly only be used once per turn. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, reactions are actually unique. because you get a reaction per turn. So on your turn, your enemy's turn, your ally's turn, you get one reaction. But each reaction you take can only be taken once per round or everyone's turns. Now, every mech starts off with two basic reactions they can take. Overwatch, which is essentially attack of opportunity if you're familiar with D&D, where if the enemy moves while within your threat range, you can shoot them or attack them with your melee weapon. And brace, when you take damage and the damage has been rolled, you can opt to post the damage roll, brace yourself to gain resistance, taking that damage and cutting it in half. Though bracing is a very difficult action because it pretty much nerfs your next turn completely. So while you can save yourself in a pinch, your next turn will be severely hampered as your mech is essentially put on the back foot. Now, there are a ton of different actions you can take. This makes it seem super simple and easy, but the number of systems that can change what actions you do, whether it's throwing grenades, setting up mines, creating obstacles, whether it's tech actions, which there are some tech actions that you can do, like scanning an enemy to gain information on them, or lock on to make it so that the next attack that hits them can gain extra accuracy. Even invading an enemy system, which is essentially hacking, like there's so much you can do on your turns, which means that every turn is different. And with the many different types of mobility in this game, the many types of actions, the many types of weapons are arcing that can fire over cover, or smart weapons that can find you no matter where you are. The combat gets crazy. Now, we actually did a live play on Lancer on the channel. If you want to check out Wand, you can find it in the live tab on the channel if you want to see how the game is played. So, I know this video has been a little bit long, but it's a review. I want to try to do as much as I can without overloading you guys with too much information. Hopefully this works out. Let me go ahead and give you my thoughts on Lancer and some of my critiques about the game. The game is great. I think Lancer's good. Honestly, lately, it's been the only thing we've been able to talk about. The fact that we're not in a Lancer game seems to be causing the group some issues. So hopefully we'll start another Lancer game at some point in the near future. But it is not without its flaws. The game, while pretty well laid out, the book can be at times it's just walls of text. Nothing is really separated out. Sections are only indicated by slightly bigger and red font, which means as you're reading through the book, you can get lost in the page really easy, especially if you have like ADHD like I do. It can be really hard to just read the book sometimes. Things are just not boxed out or separated appropriately. Some of the art spreads are also designed for, 2-page art spreads, as we can see here on this page, which goes into the next one here for IPS and North Star, or IPS North Star. And unfortunately, until this summer at least, you can't really buy physical copies of the Lancer book. They're incredibly hard to find. So these two spreads in the PDF are distracting because it feels unnecessary. This would be great in a book. And Dark Horse Comics is working with Massive Press to release an actual book here coming this summer. So, that might not always be an issue, but if you're looking to get the game now, this is just something that I figured I'd mention. The layout of the book is also just not the best. I have not had any problems finding any rules in the game. If there's any rule I've, needed to look up in the moment, it's been pretty easy to access. Granted, I still have to search through and comb through some pages sometimes. It's just the actual PDF is not super good. And to speak more on like the actual game itself, I feel like the game has such a heavier emphasis on the mechs that the pilot feels like an afterthought a lot of the time. When people are excited and talking about the game, they're not talking about the cool things their pilot can do. They're talking about the cool things their mech build can do. And while that's not necessarily a problem, the world's like the setting is so interesting. And there's so much that kind of has the pilot like interact with it. And for someone like me who really enjoys the depth of RP as much as I enjoy the complexity of combat, it just the juxtaposition between the two feels so jarring. Like I get really, really excited talking about my mech, and then sometimes I even forget my pilot exists. This may vary from person to person based on your connection to like the more rules light version that the narrative play takes. But for someone like me who likes a little bit more crunch in their tabletop in general, then the pilot stuff feels very flimsy, especially when just directly compared to the mech stuff, which is just a part of the game. So it's something that I personally struggle with, but it might vary. It's just my opinion after all. Whether you feel that way or not, it is pretty indisputable that your mech just has more cool things it can do. And your pilot, the most different things it can do by themselves is the triggers, which are just skill proficiencies, essentially. So even your talents that you pick up are only effective for use of mechs. Almost never are they used outside of combat. So it just doesn't feel like your pilot is anything other than a set of skills. And that just feels kind of bad to me. Now, one of the really good things about Lancer is they actually have a really good online companion called CompCon. Now, I use CompCon all the time. I use them for many of my videos, and this has a much better, in my opinion, like presentation style in comparison to the books. I feel like it's a lot easier to visually look at all the stats of the mechs and everything. So, honestly, as bad as the PDF can be, CompCon makes up for it in many, many ways. And that's something that I really appreciate. They even have the ability to structure your encounters. You can set up NPCs. And also, one really cool thing about it is they actually have in their directory for content for their website the community content. They actually very much support content being made for their game that you can just access here from the site. Now, not all of them are free. Some people do require, payment for some of the stuff they made, but you can access it all here. And each of these links will actually go to the websites where you can find these individual things. So, all in all, Lancer is an amazing game that has such a great community. I'll actually link their Discord down in the description of this video. I've been covering it a lot here on the channel. It's essentially the second game I check on this game just under Pathfinder, and sometimes I do more Lancer content in a week than Pathfinder content. It's a really good game. Honestly, definitely in my top 5 TTRPGs, and a game I currently can't stop thinking about because it's just really fun. If you want more information, like I said, you can check out the channel. I have videos talking about styles of play, looking at each of the licenses. I'm even going to be doing some other videos like this one where I'm looking into the game or presenting it for people to, as like a commercial. That's the next thing I'm going to be working on is why you should play Lancer. And yeah, hopefully this video gives you all the information you need for running Lancer. Or not running Lancer, sorry, for getting into Lancer. Like as a review, I would like to know, did this review do it for you? Was there anything in the review you wish you could have saw more of? Any way it could be presented differently? I would like to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. And while you're down there, leave a like. It increases the chance that other people get to see the video, and I'd highly appreciate it. And if you want to see more content like this, you can subscribe also down there. And also in the description, we have a link to our Discord where every time we go live here on the channel, you'll get a notification. And we have a bunch of people talking about all things tabletop. So if you enjoy tabletop games, it's the place to be. But anyway, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.